The economy and interest rates are having an increasing influence on day-to-day price action in the ag commodities. We're going to dig deeper into the interest rate outlook, and we'll check in with Michigan agriculture. Michiganders are dealing with bird flu and are gearing up for increased smog tracking.
Live from the week with no hump via Farm Journal broadcast, this is AgriTalk. This morning we begin with a conversation with Dr. Tim Boring, Director of Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. Then it's Bob Elliott from Unlimited Funds. Directly following the news, Greg Anderson from Drovers. I'm handsome newsman Davis Michelson, and now the host of AgriTalk, Chip Laurie.
All right, Davis. Does that mean that it was a downhill slide just like from the very beginning of the week?
Well, here's the thing, and this is all very scientifical, okay? But actually, the hump of the week occurred when you and I were asleep in our beds somewhere around 12 to 1 a.m. the other day.
Okay.
Unobservable is what it was.
But I got you.
Imperceptible, if you like.
It's one of those things, it's kind of like the tree falling in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no one there to hear it, does it actually make a noise?
Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not awake for it to happen, does it really happen?
If you don't have to get over the hump, you just keep going like on an even path.
Amen, brother.
That's where we're at right now.
I can use a little bit of that in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
I had pork yesterday, so I can fill the gap if need be.
Good for you. Good for you. We didn't talk about that. Let's talk about that at the end of the show today. The pork deals that you and I have taken advantage of here recently.
They're out there, bro.
Yeah, and it's going to fit really well following the conversation that we have with Bob Elliott, CIO of Unlimited Funds. We're going to be talking the economy and outlook for interest rates. And we're going to Michigan today. We're going to have a conversation with the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development Director, Dr. Tim Boring. Looking forward to that. And, of course, Henderson coming up right after this, which is the news.
Beginning with the National Weather Service weather outlook, additional rounds of strong to severe thunderstorms, heavy rains, flash flooding, and large hail are in the forecast across most of the plains today. The greatest risk will be across the panhandle of Texas. Meanwhile, heat risk continues for portions of southern Texas and Florida, where new records might be set. An approaching system on Sunday for Pacific Northwest may bring heavy rain and winds. Man, that Texas panhandle, bro.
Yeah, and there's already some severe thunderstorm warnings, not watches, warnings in place down there. Just west of Wichita Falls, kind of heading towards Wichita Falls, but between Witch Falls and Lubbock is where it looks like the strongest storms are happening right now. But hey, just north of Dallas, it doesn't really look good on the radar either. And that goes on up into central Nebraska, heck, even into South Dakota and North Dakota with some of the northern reaches of that system.
Well, Chip, all three major stock indices opened with losses and remained lower the entire session. The Dow led losses among the three indices yesterday, falling 1.06% by the close. Gold was higher ahead of U.S. economic data, trading around $23.55 per troy ounce, with silver weaker, around a little over $31 per troy ounce. Mm-hmm. Chip, according to Reuters, little to no ethanol will qualify for U.S. sustainable aviation fuel credits under a new pilot program by President Joe Biden's administration, which toughened climate requirements. A Reuters review of data from USDA suggests almost no U.S. corn farmers use no-till, plant cover crops, and use high efficiency at the same time, as required by the new guidelines. The Biden administration aims to boost SAF production to 3 billion gallons per year by 2030, contributing to the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. Go ahead. Yeah.
I appreciate the effort by Reuters, but they're bringing up something that we've already talked about.
They are.
I mean, this is analysis that we had 2 minutes after the 40B rules and regs were released. 2 minutes. What am I saying? 2 seconds.
Not even. Yep.
Yeah. This is stuff that if you're involved in agriculture, but this Reuters report is bringing it back up. And
Well, top Republicans have cautioned the Biden administration against using the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to reduce gasoline prices ahead of the presidential election, arguing the move would compromise U.S. energy and national security. Chip, the national average price of regular gasoline right now around $3.62 per gallon, with some states even higher. Experts anticipate higher summertime gasoline prices ahead. Some say sharply higher potentially.
Yeah, $3.62 a gallon, and there are some in the administration that will try to convince you that that's a heck of a deal.
Yeah. Well, China has blocked beef shipments from 2 U.S. facilities, according to USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service. The affected facilities are Swift Beef Company in Greeley, Colorado, and Coolport, Oakland in Oakland, California. The delisting, which is effective May 27, is reportedly due to traces of ractopamine. This, Chip, as China lifted bans on imports from 5 major Australian beef processing facilities. You think they're related?
Yeah, absolutely. This is more the rolling retaliation against China, by China against U.S. products. I don't think there's any question.
Well, China is sending record quantities of soy meal abroad as a shrinking number of pigs and weak demand for pork force processors to export their surplus animal feed. Bloomberg says cash-strapped Chinese consumers are not spending like they used to. Farmers have reduced their hog herds due to low prices, limiting demand for feed, Chip.
Well, there's another example right there. Do you think that China would be out exporting soybean meal when the U.S. is building soybean meal supplies and trying to build a market around the globe?
Exhibit B.
Another example. All right, thank you, Davis. Let's bring in Greg Henderson, editorial director at Drovers. How you doing, Greg?
Hey, good morning, Chip. How are you?
Doing real fine. Talk to me about some of the demand trends on beef.
You know, this demand thing in the beef market really surprising. It continues to surprise us, Chip, in a good way. Typically, demand starts to soften between Memorial Day and Father's Day. In the past 10 years, except for that COVID year of 2020, the annual peak in wholesale values has been reached that second week of June. And that average increase from January 1 to the first weeks in June has been about 11%. Past 3 years, even with rising prices, that demand has gone up. And that value has gone up even further for wholesale beef. So one thing we need to remember, Chip, and need to read into these numbers is that while packers are losing money and everybody's talking about packers slowing the kill down, last week we killed 18,000 fewer cattle, but we produced 10 million more pounds.
Wow.
So there's more pounds on the market, and yet the wholesale beef price has went up. It's $20 higher than it was this time last year.
Right.
That is an indication of demand that is just, I mean, it's just really mind-boggling for the beef side of things. And obviously, the futures have been taking a hit this week, and that Greeley plant and the China ban, that was a trigger for futures to go lower. Everybody was saying they were overbought anyway.
Yeah.
Demand is the key.
Absolutely. That's the underpinning or the rising tide in this market. I don't think there's any question about it. Good stuff, Henderson. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Greg Henderson, editorial director at Drovers. Check it out.
AgriTalk is brought to you by Atticus, providing battle-tested chemistries you know and trust.
Welcome back to AgriTalk. I'm Chip. Glad that you are with us on this Thursday morning. Thursday morning already, without the hump
Thursday,
day
baby.
This week.
Yeah. We shaved off hump day. That's what we did. We shaved it right off.
Right. So we are like sprinting into the end of the week already. It's pretty amazing. All right. We need to check in with what is going on up in Michigan. Dr. Tim Boring is the director of the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development, and he joins us right now. Dr. Boring, welcome to AgriTalk.
Come on, Chip.
Hey. So what's up today? What's on your schedule?
I'm actually at the Mackinac Policy Conference today, working with state leaders here across the state on policy issues. And one of the things we talk about every day around here right now is our response to highly pathogenic avian influenza.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I do want to talk about some of the general condition of Michigan agriculture, but we do need to talk very specifically about the H5N1 virus, and the dairy and the beef markets are very anxious about it. The poultry markets obviously are dealing with it. Bird flu found in 63 dairy herds in 9 states. Michigan is dealing with the outbreak as well. What is the status in Michigan? Do you feel that the outbreak has been well quantified, or is the industry still trying to figure out just how widespread the virus really is?
Well, we've got a few different pieces to this that we've really dealt with here in Michigan since we first detected it in dairy herds on March 29th here. So we stand at 23 dairies across Michigan today in a number of counties, generally in a clustered area, kind of the west central part of the state. So we're continuing to work with producers to understand what the scale of this continues to exist across the state. We're learning more every day about the epidemiology of this and just how the virus spreads. So I think it's a manageable situation on the dairy side for us right now. Continued concerns around just how we best mitigate the further spread of this. And all the time, right? We have a total horizon of this disease of something like 8 to 9 weeks now. So we're early in this in a lot of ways. But we've seen significant impacts to poultry here in Michigan. We've seen 8 confirmed poultry cases, 7 of those commercial operations, and pretty significant impacts to both egg laying and turkey broiler facilities. We haven't seen any further confirmations in poultry in several weeks. So I take that as a sign that a lot of the biosecurity steps we've ramped up here in Michigan have been working. But all the time, right? This is partly an animal disease response, and it's a human disease response. We had a case of a confirmed farm worker last week that had developed conjunctivitis associated with some milk splashed in their eye. But as FDA has talked about, right, this continues to be a mutatable virus, and where this continues to move, potentially further impacting human health down the road is a real concern, and that continues to be a driving force for us to address it on the animal side.
Yeah, Dr. Boring, you're making some great points here. The amount of effort that went into studying and prepping for H5N1 outbreak in a poultry, in the flocks in the states has been, pretty outstanding. But the movement into the dairy herds, it just brings a whole new level of complexity to the whole containment effort, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn about how we've responded to this over several years in poultry, and biosecurity works, right? Michigan had been, before this outbreak, had been spared really significant hits to commercial poultry operations, and that's because growers took biosecurity here really seriously and embraced it. It's a new wrinkle here in the dairy response, and it's asking dairy producers to rapidly up biosecurity protocols. Poultry did this over a period of time, but we've just got different threat vulnerabilities, evidently, now with this disease. It's been impressive of how quickly we've learned how much. We've got USDA epidemiologists embedded with our own teams here in Michigan. We're learning a lot. MSU's Vet Diagnostic Lab has been fantastic partners within this. But it's like we're building this airplanes, we're flying it, of executing a really robust response to this as we go.
Yeah. Have you and the people that are working on the issue in the state, have you given much thought to where you might end up when it comes to containment in the dairy herds? Depopulating poultry flocks because those birds were going to die it's terrible, but it makes sense. We're not to the point where we're going to start talking about depopulating dairy herds if they get infected, are we?
No, I don't see that at all. And everything that we've seen around this virus of cows generally recover. There's some comorbidities associated with this, like influenza in other ways. The question for us is return to full milk production. And what we see of in a number of cows, they don't return to full milk production right away, at least. The question becomes what that looks longer term forward. But you bring up, these parallels to poultry of it's terrible that we depopulate flocks in the way that we do. But an aspect of that means when the barns are empty, we've got some really robust USDA approved practices here of how you disinfect and clean and eradicate the virus from facilities. And that's going to look different in dairy moving forward. And so that's a whole piece of this too, of like long term, how do we build responses on dairies so that we're stomping this out?
Yeah. Excellent. The response and learning as we go and the process that you mentioned. Last week we learned that H5N1 virus detected in the tissue or in the beef from a dairy cow that was infected. I'm not even sure where that cow was, to be honest with you. But the meat from that cow and 95 others from that herd did not make it into the food supply. That's pretty strong evidence that the process is working, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's a message here, right? These systems work. Pasteurization works. The screening to make sure that we don't have infected animals of any kind, of any disease, making it into the food system works. You go back to that case where we determined the farm worker had contracted this. Our local health systems work. We've had dozens and dozens of people screened for a flu-like symptoms. We've had a really robust response here. And I think an important story of this, the fact is the system works.
Right. Okay. The urgency inside of your department, I think, is abundantly clear. The HPAI risk reduction and response plan that I looked at from your department is awesome. What about producers? Are producers doing all that they can, and are they getting the protective equipment in farm workers' hands that they need to have?
Short answer is yes. This has been a concerted effort of ours to make sure that producers are well equipped to responding in the best way that we all know how to. And on this week, right? And we'll know more next week. We've made available to dairy farms across the state PPE supplies from our stocks. I know a lot of farms already have this stuff on hand and they're employing this. We've taken really robust communication pathways here of making sure that we're sharing what we know here on the ground of how this continues to spread. It's a big burden on dairies, and we're asking folks to adopt a lot of different practices and just envision biosecurity in totally new ways that we didn't just a few weeks ago. Okay. So we're committed to being partners here and advancing the science and the implementation of a good response here altogether.
Gotcha. Okay. A couple of minutes left. I want to change gears. Monitoring the smog levels in 8 southern counties here over the near term is in the plans for your department. What's the goal of that effort?
Continued environmental protection here. That we coordinate really closely with sister agencies, including Eagle here in Michigan, around just environmental protections of all kinds. And so we've got really robust mechanisms within our Department of Consumer Protections, gasoline monitoring, these sorts of things. So we've got a really coordinated response here of how we continue to make sure that we're abiding by all of the the rules and regulations that are enacted here in Michigan, and we're making sure we're protecting environmental protections for consumers.
Okay. How is Michigan Ag doing? What's propelling it forward?
I think we're in good shape. It's been a good spring. We've seen some pretty favorable weather, certainly compared to last year, right? That, it was wet early on for us, and then the spigot absolutely turned off. We've seen a lot more favorable planting conditions here moving forward. This rally in the markets is certainly appreciated. For a state that grows lots of wheat, for instance, that rally is especially appreciated to just continue to drive really the diversity in our ag economy up here. So it looks like we're on the start of a good season here in Michigan.
Outstanding. Cherry season coming right up at Traverse City too, isn't it?
You bet. That's around the corner.
It's one of my favorite stops.
You're welcome anytime. We'll make sure we get you on some orchard and get you on a cherry shaker.
Outstanding. Dr. Boring, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right. That is Dr. Tim Boring, Director of the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. Okay, when we come back, we're going to get into the economic outlook. What's up with interest rates? Bob Elliott, CEO, Unlimited Funds, next.
Time for Markets Now with the experts from ProFarmer.
Joining us now, ProFarmer editor Brian Grady. Man, oh man, Beej, we look at these grain and livestock markets, and it's another defensive day. What's going on?
Yeah, so the wheat market, Chip, obviously led to the upside on the big move up here recently, but yesterday closed notably lower, and we're seeing active follow-through selling to the downside this morning, and that's really just casting a negative shadow across most of the grain and soy markets here at mid-morning. Double-digit losses in the winter wheat contracts. Almost that much in spring wheat futures, spilling over to the corn market, which it's about a nickel lower in most of those contracts here currently. Soybeans, they are the one exception. Despite weakness in the meal market and soy oil, nearby soybean futures are poking just above unchanged, but really it's pretty directionless trade, and they've just been chopping around unchanged throughout the morning.
Yeah. It seems strange for this time of the year for corn to be a follower, but it really is, isn't it?
Yeah, and wheat, seasonally, the big rally that we had was contra-seasonal. We're heading into the U.S. winter wheat harvest, obviously, and that's typically puts pressure on the market, and we're seeing some of that here.
Okay, let's go over to the livestock trade. More pressure on the cattle complex.
Yeah, so they started out to the upside this morning and tried to work higher, but just wasn't much conviction behind the buying, and now we've turned lower at mid-morning. So moderate losses in most of the live cattle and feeder cattle contracts. So nothing too significant, but definitely a weaker tone. Still waiting on cash cattle trade to develop, and it the general attitude is that we'll see prices soften from last week's all-time record. And then on the hog side, a little bit of gains in the front month June contract, but weakness in the other contracts.
All right, that's ProFarmer editor Brian Grady. Markets Now.
Opinions expressed on AgriTalk do not necessarily reflect the views of Farm Journal Broadcasting, affiliate stations, or sponsors. The best talkers in ag, including you. Join the conversation on AgriTalk. Call us at 855-4TALK-AG.
Let's jump right into this. Conversation with Bob Elliott, CEO and CIO of Unlimited Funds. The reason I want to jump right into it is because it has become one of my favorite conversations here on AgriTalk. Bob, how are you, man? It's good to talk to you again.
Good. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, glad you're here. Okay. Boy, we had a conversation with a guest analyst yesterday afternoon, Scott Davis from Bullpen Trading, who talked about the influence of the interest rate markets on the commodities. So the timing here of this conversation, I think, is really good. Let's talk about the general economy and the strength. Economy grew at an annualized rate of 1.3% in the first quarter of 2024. It's down from the initial estimate of 1.6%. But I think the thing that kind of made me go, wow, is that it's significantly lower than the 3.4% growth pace that we had in the fourth quarter of last year. 1.3% in the first quarter. Does that concern you?
Not really. I think there's some one-off dynamics that are going on in that first quarter number, as well as some things that overstated the fourth quarter number. If you look, your best bet is always to look at maybe it's real final demand and also nominal final demand, because that really tells you what the underlying demand is in the U.S. economy, and that's really what powers growth over the long term. And there you continue to see consumers, real consumer demand growing at 2 to 3%. Overall final sales demand, growing at 2 to 3%, and nominal sales and nominal demand growing in that 5 to 6% range. And so that overall picture has basically been the same over the course of the last 24 months. What caused the sort of weak number this time was some weaker foreign demand, an increase in imports, as well as an increase in inventories. So that sort of picture is not really it really overstates the softening that's happened. Really, the underlying economy has mostly not changed much.
Okay. All right. consumers, they are spending money on goods, but the growth is really happening on the money that consumers are spending for services. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, there was a significant decline in services demand that happened in COVID. And I know if COVID feels in some ways like a long since past, but we're still feeling the effects of it in the economy, with services demand not really even yet getting back up to the trend that we were seeing prior to COVID. And so that's creating this dynamic where, goods demand, and you might see something like retail sales being a little softer. Because what's happening is people are transferring their spending over to that services demand, whether it's travel or other sort of day-to-day service activities that they're experiencing. And so that's still not fully rebounded to trend. And so that's giving a real lift to what's going on in the service sector of the economy. And that's likely to sort of continue for, probably another year or so while that normalizes. So we're going to see, services strong and goods demand, fine, but not nearly as strong for an extended period.
How much picking and choosing are consumers having to do, Bob, when it comes to how much when they are spending, how much picking and choosing between services and dining and fuel and insurance are they having to do?
Well, I think for a lot of the middle class consumers, I mean, they're really feeling pressure from rising prices. And, many of them are getting some benefit from increases in their wages, but the sort of services that they've seen for an extended period of time, that they need, you could talk about homeowners insurance, something like that, which is, considered a service that's being provided. Those are the sorts of things that are rising in price. Auto insurance is rising in price. And a lot of that is those are sort of the fundamentals that people need in their day to day in order to to live their lives. That's not those are not sort of unusual or extraordinary expenses. Those are the common expenses that baseline expenses. And so in a lot of ways that strength in nominal demand, which is coming out of some increases in incomes that people are getting, that's going straight to those necessities and not really going to the luxuries that are out there for the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah, the luxuries like fast food dining. It's it is kind of crazy that some are calling fast food a luxury item now, but here we are. The inversion of the yield curve in the past has been a good predictor of a recession. But so far, it hasn't worked in this cycle. Why not? Is that part of the COVID influence?
Well, I think a big part of it is that typically the yield curve is a good indication when credit is an expansion in credit is a meaningful driver of the economic expansion. Okay. And in this cycle, private sector borrowing, household borrowing and business borrowing has been pretty modest. In fact, below the level that we've seen at the peak of recessions in previous cycles. And so that indicator is just, the impact of interest rates on the economy is just much lower in this cycle than it has been in previous ones. And so rate related indicators like the yield curve just have been a lot less effective. And what has been a much better indicator of what's going on with economic conditions is employment, income growth, and frankly, asset prices, stock prices, and house prices, which have continued to rise.
Yeah. Okay. Bob, what does all this mean for interest rates? Where are they headed? 3 months from now, where do you see things?
Well, I think interest rates are particularly important because both economic, particularly on the long end, I should say, because economic activity is pricing off of them, and also asset prices price off of what's going on with long-term interest rates. And there, what we see is this persistent pressure for those interest rates to rise. And even just this week, seeing an uptick in those interest rates with essentially no economic news, no incremental data. you're seeing interest rates sort of continue to be buoyant and move up higher. And so I think the combination of the strong economy, which is yet to be fully reflected in the yield on the long end, with the continued supply from very high U.S. government deficits, you put those things together, and the pressure really is for long end interest rates to go higher. And that's really important because higher long end interest rates are likely to affect a lot of different places in the economy, whether it's the equity market, which has been soft over the course of the last couple of months, house prices with rising mortgage rates, and just straight borrowing that, a lot of people do on the long end for business activities as well.
Yeah. What is the impact? And I don't know how else to describe it other than crack. But the government continues to feed money into the system. How is that influencing economic growth and interest rate? Doesn't it? Well, I'll just leave it there. How is it impacting?
Well, one of the challenges with it is that it has over time a lower and lower marginal support to the economy. So you keep borrowing this significant amount of money and you keep spending in an extreme way, but that starts to it's harder and harder to get incremental growth from that spending, and that's what we're seeing from the government side of things. And so what it does do is it creates a big debt burden, right? Lots of borrowing, pressure on interest rates, crowding out the private sector's ability to do economic activity and borrow. So and creating a long-term debt burden, that our children are going to be dealing with decades from now. So that's a reality. And the trade-off is not great. Such a huge debt burden for such a modest amount of incremental support to the economy, it's not great policy from a macroeconomic standpoint.
So what I think what I'm hearing from you, Bob, is that you see the Fed doing nothing right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think many people listen to the words of central bankers and the Fed and think that they're going to be very active in changing policy, but the normal behavior of central bankers when they've paused interest rates is to do nothing for an extended period of time, unless there's an acute crack in the economy, and that's basically what's happening. The big picture is the unemployment rate in the U.S. is still at secular lows, and asset prices are near high, stocks are near highs, and inflation's too high. Now, we all know it, that inflation's too high. And so you put that together, there's not a lot of urgency for them to ease the way that they talked about earlier in the year. So people who are betting on them easing are probably going to be disappointed. And that dynamic, that lack of easing, that's going to flow through to the long end and create a pressure for long end interest rates to rise. And so that's really the place to look every day. If you're looking at markets and trying to understand what's going on, the long end of the bond curve is really the place where the action is happening, because that's really going to determine how everything else flows out.
Yeah. And ultimately, this is going to have an impact on where investors decide to put their money to work for them, and those interest rate driven investments are, oh my gosh, I can't believe the music's playing. But those interest rate driven investments are still looking pretty good, aren't they?
Well, you got a decent yield, and I'd say particularly on the short end, it looks good. 5.5% cash, tough to beat with no risk.
Yep. Bob, good stuff, man. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Bob Elliott, CEO and CIO of Unlimited Funds.
The truth is hard to come by these days, unless you listen to AgriTalk. Welcome back to AgriTalk, everybody. Your pal Davis Michelson here. And let me just say, Kalamazoo. I used to have a gal from Holland, Michigan. I don't think they wrote a song about that, did they? I got a gal in Holland, Michigan.
No, I think it's Kalamazoo.
It is Kalamazoo. Zoo. Yeah. Great tune.
Yeah.
Great tune. And a great conversation with Dr. Tim Boring.
Yeah.
I I want to get into a deep discussion of some pork that we have all consumed and shopped for, some observations. But first, dude, this kind of keeps coming up to me when we're talking about the Fed. And I don't know if it's fair to say Dr. Boring said this, or Bob Elliott, for that matter. The Fed doing nothing is actually kind of doing something, isn't it?
Definitely.
I mean, you always
definitely.
say deciding not to do something is still a choice.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Great observation, Davis. Just because the Fed decides to hold interest rates steady and monetary policy steady does not mean that is a passive decision. That's an active decision. Yeah. Great point, dude.
Yeah.
It drives home the fact that maybe interest rates are kind of at that Goldilocks level right now, or that sweet spot that will allow for the quote unquote soft landing and avoid an overall recession. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So
one wonders if it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, something that you had in the news generated some response not only on Twitter or X, but also on email and text.
Was it Reuters accusing farmers of not no-tilling?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I got this one from Ken. He said, Chip, we do all three of the things required to qualify for SAF. What a statement by Reuters.
Yeah.
Then I've got this one at 4010 Chris. Said 2 out of the 3. He's got photo evidence going with this too.
Nice.
On X. And he says 2 out of the 3 for qualifying for SAF, no-till and cover crop, but plain old NH3. So for at 4010 Chris, he's probably doing 2 of the more difficult things to qualify for SAF right now under 40B, and anticipated to qualify under 45Z. I would think that the no-till and the cover crops is going to pull his carbon intensity score down quite a bit. So the bottom line is there are options out there to qualify corn-based ethanol for SAF right now. It's just documenting the process all the way through.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, by the way, in my defense, I just read the stuff. You know what I mean? I go out and try and find the stories and just read them to you. Okay? This is not me talking here. But you got to ask yourself, well, how bad really do they want to allow the farmer to benefit from compliance with the ethanol standards, with ethanol for SAF? I mean, because you're starting to talk about high efficiency fertilizer. That's not your standard NH3.
Right.
That's expensive.
Yeah.
And we have to watch our margins right now. We can't be throwing caution to the wind right now. It's not cheap to do this.
Great point. I mean, it gets back to some of the analysis that we had from the environmental groups following the release of the final ruling on the GREET model, where environmental groups said that, no, this is too easy. This is way too easy. We could flood the market with corn-based ethanol that qualifies for SAF. Well, to me, that sounds like exactly what the environmental groups would want, but it's not because it benefits corn. And they're not going to – there's a lot of the groups out there that don't want to do anything that's going to benefit corn.
That makes a ton of sense to me. Yep. Pork, indeed. Man, I had some, last week I had a little problem. I waited too long to eat pork, and I was too stupid to cook it without hurting myself. Yesterday, made some delicious, big old thick chops. Absolutely delicious. I got a 3-pack of them, and they're the super thick ones, like 2-inch. I don't even know how thick they are.
Probably 2 1/4.
They're huge. Delicious, juicy. About $4.50 for 3 of them.
Yeah.
Now, I get just a little bit of a discount because I'm like the grocery store card member guy. you know.
Right.
So they bip my little thing, and then I get the special discounted price. But dadgum, $4.25, $4.50 for 3 delicious
beautiful chops.
thick pork chops. That's three meals basically. You add some taters, a little broccoli. Now you're going to take a nap afterward.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, go on. Yeah.
Well, yeah. My trip to the store, I've always got to stop and at least glance at. I kind of call it the bargain cave. At Hy-Vee is where I do a lot of my shopping. Mm-hmm. And what I'm talking about are those coolers that sit just to the side of the meat case. Okay. Yep. Where sometimes special deals live. There was a really special deal in there. It wasn't even a full pork loin, so it's not that much of a commitment. All right. Okay. It was half loins. Half loins packaged up for $1.49 a pound.
Jeez.
I mean, we're talking about half loins that are costing somewhere between $6.50 and $7.50.
Yeah.
I bought 2 and made 8 packages of 2 pork chops each.
Yep.
So 16
you take 10 minutes,
chops,
cut them up, and you're done. Yep.
16 chops for less than $16.
I'm getting something. 16